Well, good afternoon. Welcome. It's been quite a wonderful event so far. I hope you've been able to get out and enjoy some of the many speakers and other events we have going on, because it's really been a good day so far. My name is Bob Steele. I've been asked to speak about practicing Buddhism in the Illinois Valley, which is unusual, I suppose. At least it was for me when I discovered there's other Buddhists around here in the Illinois Valley. Like many people of my generation, I came to Eastern philosophy when I was in college. Back then, we encountered the Beatles going to India to see the Maharishi, Ram Dass's Be Here Now, Shunryu Suzuki's Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind. It was quite the thing back then. We had the beat writers, Jack Kerouac and Allen Ginsberg and Gary Snyder, talking about Buddhism. And of course, from Tibet, because they were thrown out of Tibet, we had Tibetan Buddhisms coming to the United States to bring their philosophies here. So I did find Buddhism here. I am now currently a Soto Zen priest practicing at Indian Creek Zen Farm in Ottawa. I began, though, as a Christian here in this area, and I still practice Christianity. So my initial spiritual path was primarily Christian. As such, I was a lay speaker in my Protestant church. I would help give sermons when the minister was unavailable and conduct services. But I also brought to my messages a tinge of what I found valuable in Eastern philosophy. So when I returned to the Illinois Valley, I continued to practice as best I could my own practice of meditation. I continued to study Buddhism, although I found the koans somewhat inexplicable without a teacher to help me get through them. When I'd give Bible studies, I might bring in Thich Nhat Hanh, Living Buddha, Living Christ. So back in 2010, I saw an ad in the paper that there's going to be a talk at the Karras Mansion on D.T. Suzuki's time here in LaSalle. It's going to be given by a Zen priest, or actually a Zen priestess. So that intrigued me. So I went to the mansion to hear the talk because I knew that D.T. Suzuki had lived here at the Karras Mansion for over 10 years. If you go up there, there is a memorial to him. And D.T. Suzuki, if you don't know who he is, was one of the primary teachers that brought Buddhism to the West. And I think it all began here, just up the hill. There, he translated with Paul Karras many Mahayana Buddhist scriptures that had never been translated into English before. And they were published through the Open Court Publishing Company. We were the center of Buddhism at that time. Also, Paul Karras wrote a book on the Buddhist Bible. It was the history or the biography of Buddha, which was so well done that when they took it back to Japan, they translated it into Japanese, and they studied it. So Suzuki left the LaSalle in 1911 when Mr. Matheson died. Mr. Matheson was his primary sponsor and helped support him. He went back to Japan where he was taught in schools there, but he continued to translate Buddhism scriptures. Then in the 1950s, he came back to the United States where he taught at Columbia University in New York. There he influenced artists and writers such as Carl Jung, Thomas Merton, Martin Heidegger, the existential philosopher, Erich Fromm, John Cage, the composer, jazz musicians from Dizzy Gillespie to Wayne Shorter, Sonny Rollins, writers like J.D. Salinger, Aldous Huxley. They all learned from D.T. Suzuki about Buddhism, and that is when Zen became kind of a byword in our Western language as a word for simplicity or grace are doing things naturally. That was primarily due to D.T. Suzuki. Carl Jung said, "We cannot be sufficiently grateful to Suzuki for his having brought Zen closer to Western understanding." So I went and I heard Diane Martin, Roshi Martin, speak at the Karas Mansion on Suzuki. She is a Zen priest who began studying in the late 60s with Shunra Suzuki in San Francisco. Shunra Suzuki, no relation to D.T. Suzuki, was the Japanese Zen priest that came to San Francisco to have a Japanese temple for the Japanese speakers in San Francisco. All of a sudden, he was surrounded by all these hippies. And they came to hear him talk, and he developed quite a following. He opened the San Francisco Zen Center, which is now one of the leading Zen centers in the United States, and was a primary motivation for Zen spreading throughout the United States. From there, one of the students, Scott Gary, went to Minnesota, where they started the Minnesota Zen Center. So all these arose out of D.T. Suzuki. Diane began a study group then at the mansion. We would meet once a week, and she would talk to us about Zen sutras, the ox herding pictures. We would study koans. But at the beginning of her talks, she always insisted we sit for 20 minutes in meditation. So I'd sit in meditation for 20 minutes, and I would sit there wondering, how much longer before we get to the real meat of what we're here for? It was only later that I realized that that sitting, that meditation, or zazen, was the real practice we were there to learn. All the rest, the talks, the sutras, the koans, all those are just footnotes. They're footnotes to what we're actually doing, which is the practice of meditation, which leads then to insight, samadhi, concentration. So I've studied with Diane since that time. I would go to Evanston once a month for a weekend for a session she would have at her temple in Evanston. The rest of the time we would meet down here once a week studying Buddhism. I took Jukai, which is, I suppose, confirmation in the Buddhist faith, in 2012. We commit ourselves to being Buddhist. We take precepts, which are vows that we will practice as Buddhists, and we had to sew a rakusu. Now, as my wife can tell you, I had no experience in sewing, and I was certainly not the best student, but I did get the rakusu sewed. And it's kind of like a mini robe that we wear when we practice or we give Dharma talks. On the back of the rakusu, there is a poem from Dogen, or Gatha, which is a short saying. Dogen lived in the 12th century, 1200 to 1257, and he is the leading philosopher of Soto Zen, which is my school. So on the back of the rakusu, it says, to study Zen is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self. To forget the self is to be illuminated by the myriad things. Be illuminated by the myriad things means that we will be awakened to reality. To forget the self means we stop projecting onto reality our own idea of how it should be. When we forget the self, we stop projecting ourself onto our perceptions. And when we stop projecting or filtering our perceptions through our own prejudices, our biases, our sense of who we are, then there can be a direct perception of what reality is, suchness. Shunra Suzuki says it's things as it is. That maybe is Japanese, but is just look at things without the filter or coloring of our biases, our emotions, our needs, how we want things to actually be. So how do we study the self? We study the self through the practice of meditation, or zazen. There's many types of meditation practices in Buddhism. The Rinzai school practices thinking about koans. What is the sound of one hand clapping, for example? You sit there and think about what does that mean until you finally realize, I can't figure this out, and your intellectual mind drops away. The Tibetans use a lot of visualization practices in their study. My school is called the Soto Zen School, S-O-T-O, which is the school that practices shikantaza, which means just sitting. It's a non-attached or non-clinging type of action, totally unconcerned with the benefits or achieving any goal. One teacher said Zazen is good for nothing because you're not there to gain something. You're not there to make yourself a better person, to become enlightened, to walk away with anything you can say, okay, now I've got it. You're just there to sit with your own presence, to bring your own being into that one moment of time and space, and allow that presence to be fully there, not distracted by thoughts, by gaining, by any desires, other than just to be there. The Tao Te Ching, which is a Taoist scripture, has something I just feel describes the state of mind. Do you have the patience to wait till your mud settles and the water is clear? Can you remain unmoving till the right action arises by itself? The master doesn't seek fulfillment, not seeking, not expecting. She is present and can welcome all things. So, nothing special, nothing to be gained, just getting to know your own being without any coloring, any desires, any perfuming of it, just presence. A modern Zen master, John Dado Laurie, says, this can be a challenging practice in spite of its apparent simplicity. You don't attempt sustained concentration or make any effort to achieve it. Instead, there is just experiencing the awareness of the flow of the mind. No attempt to manipulate or an effort to let go of thought, just to watch the thoughts and what is arising. Hands off. What am I doing? What am I seeing? What is happening? No judgment, no attempt to understand, no categorization, no reducing things to conceptual thought. You don't focus on anything specifically or make the thoughts go away. You simply allow everything to be as it is. Thoughts come, thoughts go. Simply watch. Keep your awareness on them. It takes a lot of energy and persistence to sit shikantaza and not get caught in daydreaming. It's not easy to relinquish this desire to fill the state with something new, something better, and just to rest in stillness. Not to sit there and say, oh, okay, now I got it. Or this is wonderful. Or this, I can't do this. How much longer till this is over? Just be patient. Just be tolerant. Just allow yourself to be yourself. But the mind always wants to be occupied, because if it is unoccupied, it means you are alone. Have you ever been alone? You may be walking alone, sitting at home alone, but your mind is always occupied. Your thoughts are ever with you. It can be a fearful thing to realize you're alone and isolated. Just to face yourself as you are, without any pretensions, without any images, just who am I? Little by little, meditation thoughts begin to slow down. Finally, they cease to arise. When thoughts disappear, the thinker disappears. There is an awareness we have before thinking and before a discursive mind. The next speaker is going to speak about intuition, and this is the area in which intuition can take place, because you've allowed an openness and space that things can come in that you otherwise exclude or disregard. We identify our thinking mind with all of its stories, its feelings, and desires as our sense of self or who we are. We mistake our thought constructions for our real self. And then from that self, we create our experience and our world. Having created that self, then we have to defend it. And so much energy goes into defending who we are, who we think we are, who others think we are. A lot of that's just wasted energy. Muriel Rukeyser wrote, "The universe is made of stories, not atoms." Because through our stories, we decide what is real, what's valuable, what's possible. What do I pay attention to? What do I disregard? What makes you feel good? What don't I like? Always talking to ourselves, always judging, creating thought constructions, and then molding our experience to fit the stories we tell ourselves. We don't like what reality is telling us, well, then we'll try and do something different. But, you can't argue with reality. You're always going to lose. It's that internal chatter, that constant talking to ourselves, that separates us from our real experience of self. We never engage with the world apart from our stories about it. As a result, the boundaries of my stories are the limits of my world. Nietzsche, the German philosopher, pointed out that there's a difference between reality and our thinking mind when he said, quote, "These things are thoughts, but your thoughts are not your experience. They are the echo and after effect of your experience, as when your room trembles when a carriage passes by." In Chikantaza, our silent illumination, we find the mind heart that transcends our stories. That still mind encompasses its stories, but also finds a larger field of awareness that lies beyond our stories, lies beyond language. Shunryu Suzuki called the conditioned self small mind, and the larger mind, or larger experience, big mind. Simple words for a profound concept. Rumi, the Persian poet, wrote, "Beyond the world of right and wrong, there is a field. Go there and I'll meet you there. We'll lie down in the pasture." Beyond right and wrong, beyond language, beyond thinking, there is a field. And we can go to that field, that larger field of awareness, of which the discursive mind is a part. The thinking mind is a part of that field, but it is not the entire field. It's when we mistake our thinking mind for our entire experience that we are acting out of what Buddhists call ignorance. That's why Buddhists say ignorance is the cause of suffering, because our suffering is created by our false identification with self. The Secret of the Golden Flower, which is a Buddhist Taoist text from the 12th century that Carl Jung wrote the introduction to, says that the small mind has usurped the seat of the big mind, which is spacious awareness. In other words, we mistake the servant, which is the thinking mind, for the real master of our experience. Instead, take back the seat that belongs to the field of awareness. Recognize that there is something bigger out there than just what we think about. Allow that field to develop. It's intuitive, it's nonlinear, it has a timeless quality to it. It's a difficult challenge because to dwell in a spacious awareness, our minds want to define our experience. We want to capture what's happening. We want to categorize our experiences into something we can possess. We want to look out there and see, is something threatening me, or do I want it? We're always looking to gain something, always looking to the next minute, and not enjoying this present moment. We spend our time one step in the future, one step in the past, and never really right here, right now. We want to make something permanent out of the flow of experience, something we can have and hold, but we can't stop the flow, and we lose contact with it when we try to stop or fix it. It's like taking a bucket out to a rushing stream and pulling it out, a bucket of water, and saying, okay, now I've got it. You know you don't. You got a bucket of water. Life is going on past you as you're trying to stop and possess it. But it's difficult to discuss big mind because it is a non-dual experience. It's beyond verbal descriptions. It's beyond metaphors. It's beyond using our past experiences to define what's happening. It's just to be present and actually see what is manifesting in front of us. So instead of talking about it, trying to reduce it to something familiar, to our conceptual understanding of how things should be, take a moment to allow the patience, to let the moment be. Let that moment fully unfold itself and be present without appropriating it. Don't fill the space of your awareness with something other than what is. Dogen says, when we project ourselves onto reality, we are deluded. When we allow reality to come forth and show itself to us, there is enlightenment. Our egos have trouble accepting that, though, because aren't we the masters? Aren't we the controllers, the captains of our own experience? Let go of that, relinquish that desire to control, to judge, and see what's there. Language is how we tell the stories. But as the existential philosopher Wittgenstein noted, the limits of my language are the limits of my world. Like a fish that cannot see the water it swims in, we don't see the limits our stories bind us by. Two people can look at the same set of facts and come to startlingly different conclusions. And no amount of argument will change those conclusions, as they are limited by our beliefs, by our conditioned thinking. Just look at our political discourse today. Two people can look at the same set of facts and they'll both come up with something totally different. And you can't bridge that gap because of beliefs. You can't, it's very hard to get people to change beliefs, to accept reality. But that is where the challenge lies. Can we look at our internal chatter, our fabrication of how things should be to match our stories? and look to see if the mind can be clear. To find a space free of our internal chatter. A spacious awareness, unfiltered by thought. And that's all we do in Chikantaza when we sit there. We sit there, back erect, spine erect, but flexible, and we put our hands in the mudra position. And we sit there for 40 minutes, not moving. Just being. If you got an itch, don't scratch it. Don't move away, because that's another distraction. Thoughts come and you think about things I could be doing. Well, those thoughts come. Or, boy, what a wonderful insight. I can't wait to write that down when I get off the cushion. Let it go. Just relinquish all of those things. Just experience being, because we never experience our own being. We're afraid of being alone, afraid of seeing who we are just to be. But when you do that, there's a lightness and an energy that you can experience. Heaviness is the burden of the self that we carry around all the time. In Buddhism, they call it the corpse on the back that we carry around. Let it go, relinquish it. Be in harmony with what is. Don't argue with it, but match it, be intimate with what is. Allow it to show you what it is, rather than you telling it what it should be. And then there may be an end to suffering. That's the Buddha's promise. So the Buddha said of how thoughts create our experience that all experience is preceded by mind. Led by mind, made by mind. And put in the word thought there. Speak or act with a corrupted mind, and suffering follows as a wagon wheel follows the hoof of the ox. Rural society, so he uses rural images. As the wagon wheel follows the hoof of the ox. All experience is preceded by mind, led by mind, made by mind. Speak or act with a peaceful mind, and happiness follows like a never-departing shadow. So in Buddhism, through meditation, we still discursive thought and the internal chatter, enter what we call samatha, or stillness, which is a tranquility of awareness, serenity, the point where the mud is settled and the water is clear. From there we can develop vipassana, which is the practice that leads to insight, where we can examine the true nature of reality. In our minds are a stream of consciousness in which all the contents flow into each other. Sensations become feelings, thoughts, desires, actions leading to more sensations. All this is like a waterfall of fleeting sensations we swim in. When we still the mind and the body, we can better observe this process and how it creates our interpretation, our stories about reality. We can slow that waterfall down and see it instead as a flowing stream that we are a part of and that we're moving within. Because we are not separate from reality, we are a part of it. And when you're not creating stories and focusing your energy on the outside, then that energy can move inward towards the center, strengthening your sense of presence, your presence of being right now. But when you're looking outward for validation, for something outside yourself to make you happy, that new something you can buy or something you can do to make yourself happy, then the energy moves out and it dissipates itself. The energy that we find in contact with through living. The mind is not like not having something to grasp onto. The Buddhist image is it's like a bird flying in the sky that's always looking for that tree branch to land on, to cling to, instead of being in the freedom of the sky. It takes courage and patience just to be. not to project stories on what's manifesting, instead to be fully open to your experience without any effort or any need to do anything more than just be present. The poet T.S. Eliot wrote, "At the still point of the turning world, neither flesh nor fleshless, neither from nor towards. At the still point, there the dance is, but neither rest nor movement, and do not call it fixity, where past and future are gathered, neither movement from nor towards, neither ascent nor decline, except for the point, the still point, there would be no dance, and there is only the dance." That all sounds very poetic and mystical. Is there any factual basis for this experiencing? Well, Buddhism and science have come together about this. I have a friend, Beth Jacobs, who's a retired psychologist and a professor, who's written a book called The Original Buddhist Psychology. And she studied the Abhidharma, which is a 2,000-year-old Buddhist practice, which monks studied this process of how the mind works, and they wrote very detailed descriptions of how the mind processes information. And Beth was amazed that when she studied this Abhidharma, the Buddhist psychology, how it matched up exactly with modern neurological studies on how we process perception. They have the 17 steps of how we process perception in Buddhism, and she said it matched step by step how modern neurology, neurological physicists found it. So, how does it work? We have the 5 senses, in which sense impressions enter the mind door. Consider, for example, that you're walking in the woods, and suddenly you see a curvy shape on the ground. Light bounces off the shape, is sent to your visual cortex for processing. This is milliseconds immediately. There's a vibration in the field of your awareness, and you turn your awareness towards the image. The visual cortex sends the image to the hippocampus to see if it is a threat or an opportunity, and also to the prefrontal cortex, which begins to process the information. In Buddhist psychology, this is called the stage of investigating and determination. Scientists call it apperception, which is taking in information and filtering it through what is stored in the brain. Here then begins planning and evaluation. The prefrontal cortex, we decide how we feel and what to do. Is it a snake or is it a stick? The hippocampus may say, well, it's a snake, and send out an alert, watch out, and the fight or flight hormones start to kick in. But the prefrontal cortex may use long-term memory to figure out, it's just a stick, relax. All this goes on unconsciously before we even realize that this is happening. But something pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral is going on in your perceptions, which tells your brain what to do. If it's pleasant, we generate dopamine, which is a pleasant sensation or hormone, or the flight and fight responses of adrenaline. In this space, you still have time to make decisions, and there's some will involved in this reaction. This is a critical point, or the gap, in which we can see how decisions are being made, where feelings, like dislike or neutral, begin to shift into emotions. Before thinking, before linguistic things begin to merge into consciousness, we can still see by our awareness its beginnings and development. At this point, we still have free will to choose our path. We can do the same thing with thoughts. We can see the thought arising, begin to trace the thought before we identify with it and we become part of it. We can still see what is going on. we can see how we mentally fabricate our experience. This first instance of perceptual contact is what Beth Jacobs calls the gateway to karma, or the gap. And she says this is a huge gift. Even the slightest sense of pure seeing can be refreshing. We still can see the proliferating associations flowing from the prefrontal cortex, like, dislike, how did I handle this before? But we are aware of it. It's not an unconscious response. We still have will. Observing the process of associations and habits, we're creatures of habit, for example. Habits dictate our response more often than not. But if we can spot the habit formations, we can stay with the perception, we can remain in the present moment. Instead of, as Beth says, allowing the flood of past associations to keep us in repetitive cycles. We stay present with our experience. We become intimate with our experience, and with patience and persistence, we keep the process ongoing. We don't stop. We stay in a gap between perception and reaction. And we stay with mindfulness. Because, as Miguel de Unamuno, Spanish philosopher, said, to fall in the habit is to cease to be. Viktor Frankl, the Holocaust survivor and author of Man's Search for Meaning, said, between stimulus and a response, there is a space. This is the space that Beth's talking about. In that space is our power to choose our response. In that response lies our growth and our freedom. So it doesn't have to be an outside perception that causes this to happen. It could be a mental formation arising. For example, a thought of an upcoming deadline may arise. I see it arising, I feel a twinge of anxiety. Anxiety moves towards doubt, fear. What happens if I don't meet those deadlines? Emotions start to come in. I'm no longer really working with what is. Now I'm working with anxiety, fear, suffering. The self wanting to defend itself against a threat. If I can stay with a moment before I make my response, I can stay and make a skillful response instead of unskillful response. Because there, mindfulness is present. We can keep ourselves with what's present, not be bound by preconceptions or how we did things in the past. Ralph Waldo Emerson said of this, quote, we find ourselves not in a critical speculation, but in a holy place. We should go very warily and reverently. We stand before the secret of the world, there where being passes into appearance and unity into variety. This is the point where reality is not what we think it is. What we think it is only our image, our concept of what is happening. In Zen, it's said to name a color is to lose it. For example, I see a red rose. I immediately identify it. Red, that's a rose. Associations begin to come up with red roses. My grandmother had a rose garden. She grew roses, and she had American Beauty roses. I'm starting to go off away from the rose into association. American Beauty, that's the title of the Grateful Dead album, for those senior citizens. Now I'm thinking about the Grateful Dead. What happened to the rose? It's still there, but I'm gone somewhere else altogether. I'm no longer living, I'm thinking about life. It's a life lived secondhand. But instead, with mindfulness, we can experience pure objectless awareness, which is to stay with perception at the gateway to karma before we begin to name things, before we begin to conceptualize things. Consciousness does not stand outside reality. It's entwined with objects and events. And all those objects and events are entwined with each other into a single whole. And yet, in that whole, there's also multiplicity. Buddhism is called one bright pearl. It's a wholeness of life, yet we can also see in that the many things that flow in that unity. But when we try and pull one thing out of it and think about it and mold it, we have lost contact with the wholeness of life. We divide life into the whole into parts. But if we can just keep our perception open and abide and bear attention just to see and perceive and not go somewhere else. What's there? Whatever we have to deal with right here. Reality may be inconceivable to the thinking mind, for language cannot contain it, but still we can experience it. So don't confine your experiencing self to what you think about. Intuition, awareness, just being here, not naming, not thinking, intimate with what's happening, whether it's doing the dishes or if it's sitting on the zazen cushion, it's all the same. It's all one thing. There's no priorities. Not one is better than the other. It's life. It's our life, and it's how we live it. And we need to do this, get past our preconceptions and just keep doing it endlessly, not stopping and saying, okay, well, I figured that one out. I guess I can pat myself on the back and quit. There's no quitting. It's living is ceaselessly moving into new things, allowing new things to arrive. No matter how often we've been here before, this is our first time, if you just see it that way. There's an ancient Buddhist sutra, Trust in Mind, from 600 AD that says, language contains no way to describe the ultimate unity of suchness, beyond belief, beyond experience, beyond space, beyond time. Quantum physics tells us that when we touch a light wave with our consciousness, when we identify the light wave collapses into a point that we can now fix in time and space. We can measure and compare it. Because we've pulled that point out of the wave of oneness, and we can measure it, name it, fix it. But that point is no longer part of the wave. It's in a static position. We can judge its speed, but we cannot stay with the flow of suchness. You know, there's Schrodinger's cats, Schrodinger's box.
Living and dying.
Yes. The thought experience is that there is a chicken in a box, and if you open the box up, one of two things is going to happen. Either it's going to release a poison that's going to kill it, or it's going to be alive. We don't know until we open the box which one is which. He used that to compare quantum physics with how consciousness approaches reality. So in life, we can act through small mind, to the dualistic experiencing, but don't ignore big mind, the larger sense of being. We can move as a thinking self, but remember, we also have an existential experiencing that's free of thought, as a direct perception of reality. We need to integrate both in order to be whole. Because there's no hierarchy between small mind and big mind. We need our thinking minds in order to function many times. It's when we mistake it for our true self, our experiencing self, that we experience suffering. There's a poem that says, by Dongshan, however much we want to be on being and non-being, in other words, to be in unity, still, we must return to the marketplace and sit and act. So, return to the reality of our lives, but don't forget there's awareness that's spacious in which we can act. And in that action, we can still choose skillfully. Katagiri who is Shunryu Suzuki's successor and also Diane's teacher, says that we exist as a lively energy at the intersection of time and space. In time, there is duality, or the small self. In space, we are free of limitations of self and other. We stand there at that intersection, 1 foot in time, 1 foot in space. Sometimes big mind may be in the background, small mind in the foreground. Otherwise, it may be the other way around. Well, one side is lit up or illuminated, the other side is darkened, but they both are there. It's like the moon, which in Buddhism is often considered a symbol for enlightenment. When you see the crescent moon, the full moon is still there. You see the full moon, the crescent moon is still there. It's just how you perceive it. We can see that each thing exists separately from everything else, but also realize their individual existence is not a real self. It's only a useful means for us to utilize and something temporarily running through our conscious mind in the realm of time. Each of us, a human being, a bird, or a tree, we each have our own unique way of manifesting this energy at this point, but this intersection of time and space, this one moment, and then we release that time, that energy back into space. Darrell Bailey says of this meeting that our experiences and perceptions result from consciousness, projecting meaning into neutral patterns of energy, creating an illusion of personal significance and narrative. In reality, everything is dynamic, unresolvable play of consciousness that does not need to be solved, only recognized for what it truly is. Ever-present, ever-changing, and yet always immovably here, now. This reliving reality that defies all attempts to describe it. And we are not separate from this aliveness, this presence, this vast no-thingness that is showing up as everything. Every apparent thing is dissolving the moment it forms, like clouds in the sky, and at the heart of it all, there is a stillness and energy. An openness that is free of all ideas, of all conclusions, free of all beliefs. Free of all intentions and all meanings and purpose, seeking no results. It allows everything to be as it is. Infinitely vast and deep, it is no thing at all. It is showing up as a light on the waves, the light on the leaves, the radiance of the breakfast dishes, the simplicity of being here, now, just as we are, the joy of not needing anything other than what is, the immensity in a drop of water, the wonder of being alive, the beauty in drinking a cup of hot tea, the freedom of not knowing anything other than a groundless openness and immense freedom. The poet Mary Oliver asked the existential question, when I'm free, what happens next? She writes, now that I'm free to be myself, who am I? Can't fly, can't run, and see how slowly I walk. Well, I think I can read books. What's that you're doing? The green-headed fly shouts as it buzzes by. I close the book. Well, I can write down words like these softly. What's that you're doing? The wind whispers, pausing in a heap just outside the window. Give me a little time, I say, staring back at its silver face. It doesn't happen all of a sudden, you know. Doesn't it? Asks the wind, and breaks open, releasing the distillation of blue irises. My heart panics not to be as I long to be, the empty, waiting, pure, speechless receptacle. So, Buddhism in the Illinois Valley. It's here. It's available. Everyone practice it. Any questions or any comments? Okay, would you like to take a moment and just maybe sit in Shikantaza? Just take a few minutes. First, bring yourself into the present. Sit upright. Spine should be erect, but not stiff. Feet on the ground. Bring yourself clearly into the room. Then bring the mind quietly into your body. Be conscious of how you're sitting, of your posture. Spine erect, not stiff, feet on the floor, and just note this is how it is. And then very quietly bring your attention to the ingoing breath and the outgoing breath. Breathing in deeply, filling the lungs with the breath. Then releasing, breathing out, softly, slowly, letting the lungs empty. In Shikantaza, we just follow the breath. Breathing in, breathing out. Letting the body settle. Not thinking about the breath, not looking at it from a distance, not looking at it from your head, but just being the breath. No separation between you and the breath coming in, diaphragm expanding, the breath going out. Air flowing over your upper lip, maybe. The warm air going out through your nostrils. Just flowing. Thoughts arise. It's natural for the mind to think, like waves in the ocean. Thoughts are not the problem. It's when we chase after them. Just allow them to be. Don't give them energy. Just welcome them as guests in the guest house. But don't offer them a cup of tea. Just let them go out. No thinking about the past. No anticipating the future. No attention even right now. There is just sitting. Whatever happens is fine. Whatever comes up is natural. Breathing in, I know that I'm breathing in. Breathing out, I know I'm breathing out. The sounds come to our ears, just allow them to come. You slowly open your eyes and come back into the room, back into our time together. Thank you for your attention.